I don't talk about this often because, honestly, I don't even know if I believe it myself anymore. Time has a way of warping memories, distorting truth into something that feels like a dream. But there's one memory I can't shake, one that still crawls into my thoughts at night. Something I wish I had never found. I was about 5 or 6 when it happened, young enough for my memories to be blurry, yet old enough to know what fear felt like. We were at a lake, Lake Michigan I think, on a summer trip with my family. The air smelled like sunscreen, and the sun glared down on the water, making everything look too bright. I remember the warmth of the sand beneath my feet, the way the tiny waves kissed the shore before retreating back into the deep. The lake had always felt comforting to me. I wasn't afraid of the water, wasn't scared of swimming. But that day something felt different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the air seemed heavier, like a storm was coming, except the sky was clear. The water, usually inviting, looked darker. It was nothing I could prove, just a feeling. A deep, twisting discomfort in my gut. Still, I was just a kid, and kids ignore their instincts all the time. So I went into the water anyway. I stayed in the shallow end, rolling around in the coolness, letting the waves push me gently back and forth. It should have been fun, but after a while I started feeling off. My chest felt tight, and an overwhelming sadness settled over me like a blanket. It didn't make sense. One moment I was playing, and the next, it was like something was pressing down on me. I wanted to cry, but no tears came, just a sharp, painful lump in my throat. Then, suddenly, the feeling passed. Just like that. As if whatever had been gripping me decided to let go. I started laughing, shaking off the weirdness, telling myself it was nothing. Just my imagination. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. And then I found it. I had rolled around in the same spot twice, feeling the soft, muddy bottom of the lake beneath my fingers. But the second time, my hand brushed against something solid. At first, I thought it was a piece of driftwood, smooth but firm. My fingers curled around it instinctively, and as I pulled it closer, the texture shifted beneath my grip. It wasn't wood. It was something else. Something unnatural. The moment I lifted it, my stomach twisted. It was heavier than I expected, like it didn't want to leave the water. My fingers slid into 2 hollow spaces, and the second I realized what they were, my whole body locked up in terror. Eye sockets. I was holding a skull. But it wasn't just a skull. It was more than that. The front had been carved away, smoothed down as if someone had shaped it into a mask. The bone was discolored, covered in patches of what looked like old, rotted skin. There were strands of grass tangled around it, but the worst part was how the eye holes seemed to stare back at me, empty and endless. I dropped it immediately, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted in place. The water around me seemed darker now, colder. I could swear the ripples were moving against the wind, circling where the skull had disappeared beneath the surface. Then something touched my ankle. I lost it. I scrambled backward, tripping over my own feet, splashing wildly as I tried to get away. The sensation was brief, barely there, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. Something had grabbed me. I didn't care if it was just seaweed or a fish brushing past. I wasn't taking any chances. I ran out of the water, shaking so badly I could barely breathe. My family was a few yards away, oblivious. My mom waved at me, smiling. "Having fun, honey?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't even process what had just happened. I just stood there, dripping, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. That night, I didn't sleep. The image of the mask, no, the face, burned into my brain. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had touched something I was never meant to find. Something that had been waiting in the lake for a long, long time. And then the nightmare started. They were always the same. I was underwater, staring up at the distorted sunlight filtering through the waves. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then, out of the darkness, a shape would emerge. A face, but wrong. Hollowed out, stretched, like someone had carved away the parts that made it human. The empty eye sockets would lock onto mine, and then I'd wake up gasping for air, my chest tight as if I'd really been drowning. I never told anyone. How could I? I was just a kid. And maybe, just maybe, I had imagined the whole thing. But then, years later, I found out something that made my blood run cold. I was reading an old article about Lake Michigan when I stumbled across a section about missing persons cases. Apparently, over the years, several bodies had been found in the lake. Bodies that had been mutilated, their faces carved away. The police had no leads, no suspects. Just bodies, appearing and disappearing, swallowed by the water. And that's when I knew. What I had found that day wasn't just some random piece of debris. It had been a part of someone. Someone real. And maybe, just maybe, the lake hadn't wanted to let them go. I haven't been back to that part of the lake since. and I don't think I ever will. Because sometimes the things we find in the world aren't meant to be found. And sometimes they don't stay buried.